The Brooklyn Nets close out the season on a 4-game winning streak, and their reward, a play-in game. They did it in that perfect Nets fashion, behind Kevin Durant, behind Kyrie Irving. We break down the standings, what the Nets have lying ahead, and ultimately, the biggest tidbit of information around a player that hasn't stepped on the court yet, Ben Simmons, all coming up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, DraftKings, FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day and let you know that today's episode, it's brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And Doug, where we start is where the Nets always seem to finish, getting the job done, but in somewhat encapsulating season fashion, beating the Pacers here to close out the season and secure their play-in spot.
Well, it could just never feel easy. I'll tell you that. Like, that's been the theme of the season so far. You feel good. I'm glad they're in the 7th seed based on the rest of the context of the regular season. If you told me at the beginning of the year 7th seed, I would have thought, something went way off the rails, which it did. But but in this game, it's like, okay, you're playing a Pacers team that wants nothing more than to lose. A win would have been terrible for the Pacers. They've just been sitting out Brogdon forever, whatever. But in the Nets fashion, they just can't make it easy. And that being said, and also sort of like Nets fashion, for the most part, when they're really rolling here, they are able to end up getting the job done. And in the end, it was really just the W that mattered. Like, they needed to get this win. They needed to go back to Barclays for the play-in game to have it be home against whoever it ended up being, because the rest of those games were all going on at once. And so that's really in the end. It's like, was it a W or not? And then it was. And so we'll take it. So, and, from where they stood a few weeks ago to where they are now, this feels, I have to say, this feels like a good outcome, right? Like two bites of the apple now for the playoffs, and you have to win one out of those two. Effective odds when they're not favorites are like 75% chance they make the playoffs, and it's going to be even better than that because they're pretty big favorites against Cleveland. So you have to feel good about it in the end.
No, of course. Listen, 2 weeks ago, the way we were talking about things and looking at what could have been a 10th seed and having to win 2 games just to make it into the playoff picture, trying to get Kyrie into a bit of a role, trying to get all these different players and circumstances and figuring out who you bring in with you. You covered, obviously, Kessler Edwards and the decision around the roster that came in. It feels like there has been no less than 33 balls being juggled in the air by the Brooklyn Nets over the course of this season. And when we look back, hopefully midway through the playoffs in a second round series against whoever, we won't really remember that they had to come back from 20 plus points against the New York Knicks, that they almost gave up a lead against the Pacers in the final game of the season. All you'll go is look at the schedule and say, 4-game winning streak. That's nice. That feels solid. And we get ourselves there. And just quickly on a side note, tip of the hat to the NBA, because when you have all of these games going on at once on a Sunday, like the play-in is fabulous. It makes for exciting basketball down the end of the season where it otherwise meant nothing a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah. From that perspective, from the NBA, total mission accomplished on this. Yeah. I know people were speculative of what the play-in was going to mean. I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that it's really played out better than expected, frankly, for the NBA. This Eastern Conference was the perfect example where these teams are really jockeying. You actually have a quasi-title contender among the play-in teams, which feels totally crazy. So yeah, from a play-in perspective, this is exactly how it turned out. Didn't work out the same way in the Western Conference because those teams just ended up being on, weirdly all pretty scattershot. But yeah, no, I know I tuned in. I know you did too. Sunday afternoon is not your typical sort of sit down must watch basketball, but it became like that for a few hours there. ESPN game, national spotlight. You're watching all the other stuff that's happening, and all those teams ended up winning, sort of getting the job done. But, from a basketball perspective, 100% what you wanted. And you make a good point about the 4-game winning streak. And it is funny what sports will do to you, because sports will make you the prisoner of the moment and then have you like some sort of like not Stockholm syndrome, like some sort of like PTSD, make you then forget about that moment almost immediately and then just like wrap it back into the new narrative. Because I kind of like had already wiped away that Knicks comeback that honestly in the moment, like I needed like to go on medication. Like I was like I was so flabbergasted during that game when they were getting killed that I was being serious when I said I'm gonna have to take a mental health day from the podcast. Like I'm not gonna do a podcast that they lost that Knicks game. Totally forgotten. I didn't barely even remember when you said it, because now they beat the Cavs. You're like 7-2, baby, here we go. And that's just like kind of what sports is all about.
Well, and on top of which, too, you come into this Pacers game, and in the first half, you're up double digits. We're going to get into the game in a minute, but the same kind of thing, right? Every one of these last handful of games, including the Houston one, was like every time they have a lead of a certain margin, you go, I knew it, guys. I don't even know what we're worried about. And then as soon as that margin shrinks, you go, you know what it is, though? It's just been a running theme all year here, guys. This is something they can't get out from underneath. So ultimately, they do get this done.
Well, can I say something about that? It's like almost like about the Nets. It's almost like they think that too. Nash kind of said it. Nash kind of said it in one of the in-game interviews where he just said we lost our intensity. And I can't remember if he used the word again, but he might as well have, because there's just been too many times during the season where we've seen these massive lapses in. I don't know if it's like, the killer instinct, because they clearly have that. Right, because they win games. They've won enough close games down the stretch. Yeah, there's been some some ones they didn't, but they clearly have that in them. But they'll just end up being these long lapses of just not having enough. Like can't keep their foot on the gas for long enough. This game ended up being one of them. It's really kind of been a theme for the season. I think it's just that you just can't trust anything from this Nets team. It's been like this from day one, whether it's the news or injuries or whatever it is. You simply just can't trust anything. It makes for an exciting viewing experience, but it's not exactly, it's never felt comfortable. And this game, it only could have worked out this way, that you would not feel comfortable until kind of near the end with the way the Pacer game shook out.
Yeah, exciting. That's an interesting word to use. I would have gone, heart palpitating or something along those lines. But
right, it's not exciting when you're hanging over the cliff and like and the bear's chasing you and you're like
the third finger hold, or am I going to drop?
Right, like this doesn't feel exciting. Like it feels another thing. Like there's a ton of adrenaline, so I don't die. But I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm being titillated right now by what's happening, and that's kind of what's been happening all season for the Nets.
And the one other point too, because you mentioned it there about the in-game, responses from Steve Nash when he's asked about what's happening there. And I said it going back last week or so. This is now the second time though where we've heard from Kevin Durant and from Steve Nash. Kevin Durant after the last post game called a vote of confidence, but when asked about Steve Nash, he said, "Listen, if you look at everything that he's had to deal with over the last 2 years, I think he's doing a great job." All you could want to hear if you're pro Steve Nash, or if you're just asking, is Steve Nash securely at the helm of this franchise? Yeah, because he's in lockstep with Kevin Durant. And they both said, going over the last handful of games of the season, the intensity piece. When they asked Steve Nash about, what do they need to do on the defensive end? He goes, I honestly can't answer that, because it's a choice to dial up the intensity. Kevin Durant spoke to lackadaisical, making careless fouls, etc. When you hear that from the head coach and then from your superstar, I think that tells you, for better or worse, they're on the same page and they know what the issue is. It's just a question mark of, is this superstar talent in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving saying, we can see it. We can see the light at the end of this season and we just want to get there. And that's why you see these lapses, or if it's legitimately something that they have a hard time overcoming and could be an issue going forward throughout the playoffs.
I think I think it's a combination too. I think we see it from this game also where, an outsized amount of their scoring does come from these two players, and so much of the offense comes from these two players that when it is those two guys, you are going to kind of ride or die on how they're playing. There's no Seth Curry, there's no Goran Dragic, right? Like they don't. Obviously, Simmons, we'll talk about him.
There's no James.
They don't
Johnson.
have no JJ, baby, just wheeling and dealing. There's the shimmy and shaking. There's no and so I think you kind of will ride the roller coaster of how those two are playing, because they are so far and away your two best players. And it's going to be hard for those two to maintain the same amount of tenacity and executing on the same exact level the whole game, that I think, and it's not their fault, by the way. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to play 42 minutes of high intensity basketball to beat the Pacers. Like that's really shouldn't be the case, but it continues to be, because they just don't have enough their two options are great. They don't have enough other options to really distance themselves over long stretches. And I think that's part of the problem too. So it's like one of these things. Yes, we recognize it, but there aren't all that many solutions to it either at this point. Now, if you got Curry and Simmons and Dragic, and you have all these other scorers, and you have like, two defensive guys at all times, like, then I think it's going to be a different case. But that's just legit from day one has not been the case with this team. They have not played with a full roster from the day one. And that's going to be super hard to remain consistent over the long term and the short term as well.
Yeah, and that's why when some fans call out the idea of around the way you stagger the minutes for Kevin Durant or for Kyrie Irving, taking Kyrie Irving out in the last couple of minutes of quarters and how you get beat up in those minutes. Yeah, obviously you get beat up in those minutes. Go around any team in the league and say, take off one of your best two players on the court and tell me if you win or lose those minutes. More often than not, you don't. And in a game like this, when you mentioned all of those players they didn't have at their disposal, that's really the key to it, is having enough of the offensive healthy firepower to be able to stem the tide before you get those two guys back out there on the court. We are going to talk about here in a minute why, even though Kevin Durant had a horrible shooting performance, it's actually a good thing. Doug's going to explain that all to you right here in a minute. We're going to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. No, over at BuiltBar.com, because Built Bar is, of course, that little extra jolt of protein and energy that you need in your life, and I'm sure the Brooklyn Nets are going to be reaching for as they head towards their playing game on Tuesday night against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Why? Because it's covered in 100% real chocolate, and it's 100% good for you. Not only the bars, but also the puffs, the first of their kind, also covered in 100% real chocolate, protein-infused marshmallow bar, delicious as well. You get over on those stats, you know you're talking about just 130 calories, only 4 grams of carbs, only 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. If you're thinking about reaching for one of those disgusting candy bars, let me tell you, my friends, you're going to be giving yourself 240 calories and 30 grams of sugar. I wouldn't even respect you if you did. You head over there to built.com, where you can find mint brownie, coconut, almond, all new delicious flavors coming out all the time. If you can think of a flavor that would be delicious, chances are Built Bar is making it, because that's what they're about. Good for you and good tasting. Go to built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off on your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, my friend. When we talk about takeaways from this Pacers game, you said we call it a pre-show meeting, Kevin Durant only knocked down 5 buckets, but he was doing something else that I think we can look at from a play-in and playoff standpoint and say there's real value in an area of his game that he's been able to lean into, something that he hasn't necessarily done over the course of the season.
Okay, so before I get to that, I got to say one more thing. I'll tell you what sealed Kevin Durant's shooting fate in this game did the quick calculation on what he needed to be a 50, 40, 90 guy. And that he wasn't going to qualify because he didn't play enough games. But he needed to go 4 for 4 from 3, or somewhere around that, 4 for 4, 5 for 6, something like that. It was going to round up to 40%. Put that out into the universe, and that basically sealed his fate that he wasn't going to make a 3-pointer, because I have an unbelievable track record along these lines about putting something out there and having it just immediately be wrong, or feel like the universe is like now saying, "Oh yeah, you think so, pal? Okay, let's just show you how he's going to do it," because
the universe wasn't even paying attention until you mentioned it, and then they went, "Huh." Yeah. Interesting.
Like,
here's a pebble.
You think that seems kind of easy? How about an 0 for 6, pal?
Here's a stick in your bicycle spoke. Go ahead.
All I did was hear about it. Okay. Anyway, so that's my fault. The bad shooting game. I will put that one on my shoulders. No, look, we've seen this sort of, I wouldn't call it a maturation, but a slight shift in his game over the last bit here, where and it kind of started when teams were running like exclusive traps at him, and he needed to pass out of it, because this is kind of like before Kyrie had come back, and teams just got figured it out to like, well, all we got to do is just double team him all the time and then make everyone else beat us. And that's a pretty effective strategy. Around that time, we'd have seen him increase the distribution and frankly the assist numbers, where this is his third. He had 16 assists, easily his highest of the season. That's his third double digit. What's that?
Career high in assists for Kevin.
Yeah, okay. And I'm not surprised. I mean, 16 is a lot for that's a lot for like peak Harden. So I get this 16 assists is a ton. But that's his third double-digit assist game in the last 7 games, which for him is a lot. Like, that is a lot of assists, and that's just something we've been seeing more and more. And whether it's a recognition that he's not going to be able to make every shot, which is, by the way, correct, or a recognition that he just seems to trust the other players a lot more, like Claxton, like Bruce Brown, like Kessler Edwards, specifically these guys, and getting to the rim, rolling to the basket, like getting into like, especially when they go to the zone, these guys flashing. The recognition that like, hey, I don't have to do anything. I can trust these other guys to make the correct decisions and to either shoot it or make the next pass, or giving them the pass now is going to get me back into a better position 2 passes from now. Like any one of those different things that can happen. It's extremely important as they head to the postseason for teams to recognize that, like, hey, if you screw up on an assignment, he's going to find a guy for another basket. That is not something he's done a ton in his career, and he's just doing it now. And it's just like, frankly, almost a totally new facet to his game.
Check the tapes, man, because I swear, I hope it wasn't something that I dreamed about saying and then never actually brought up. In the post-Harden trade era, I looked and said, I think we should anticipate.
Yes, you did.
Woo! I think we
and whether you said it on the show or you said it to me personally, it's something you've definitely said. So we're gonna put that one on the record.
I can always trust Doug to validate me on the podcast and off the podcast. But there's 2 reasons to it. One, out of necessity, because if you're not going to lean into this facet of your game, you're probably going to see those double teams that we've seen, the blitzing defenses, and then the stagnation of the offense overall. But there's the 2, and we can even say 3 obvious pieces, which is adding Seth Curry at the trade deadline. He replaces Joe Harris. He's a knockdown shooter, something you didn't have prior to that, even with James Harden. Not nearly the 3-point shooter that Seth Curry is. You add in a big like Drummond, who has very soft hands, we've talked about so much. You add in a guy like Goran Dragic, but then the emergence of Bruce Brown as being a perimeter threat, and you saw it in this game, man. The no-look, I called it a no-look reception from Nick Claxton, where he gave it to Kevin Durant, drove the lane, and Durant gave him a feed. I mean, if you're on YouTube, literally, it was NFL style over his head to bring it down and then go up and elevate and put it through. The 2-man tandem that Claxton and Durant have been forming over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks of this season, that's going to be as important as anything. And you said it, trust. If Kevin Durant feels like he has 3, 4, 5 guys that he can trust to go to when the defense comes at him, whether Kyrie is on or off the court, it opens up everything offensively for this team, and it makes them far more dangerous because they're more balanced. As good as Kevin Durant is, as good as Kyrie is, if you're not going to punish them for running those blitzing looks at you, it's not going to matter. And we've seen teams be able to do that defensively. So this could be as important as anything that they accomplish going into the play-in game is Kevin Durant looking and trusting the players around him, knowing that it's going to lead to the best results, which is wins. I mean, that's all that matters here is wins. And Superstar being willing to do that, had 20 points in this game, had a bad shooting night, but the assists, the points, that whole combination, more than enough, because at the end of it, you won the game.
Yeah, look, his first 3 is 16 assists, so he basically assisted everybody. But his first 3 assists in this game were to 3 different players.
Yep.
And that is not I wouldn't call that by design, but because these weren't like set plays that they're running as like part of a package, but it's by comfort, right? And so when the first, and by the way, none of those were to Kyrie Irving either. It was one to Drummond, one to Bruce Brown, and one to Kessler Edwards. Like that is just a clear sign to these other guys. Like, again, I trust you. Like, I don't need to take 25 to 30 shots a game for us to win. You can take some shots. Your shots are frankly most times going to be easier because right. like you were seeing, they're either going to be a lot closer to the basket because of how the defenses are going to approach you. They're going to be because of an overcompensation to not allow Kevin Durant to score. Right. And we've seen him get better about the slip pass. And honestly, part of this is why the turnovers have increased too, which we got to be frustrating. But if you look at them as part of an overall package of, yes, hey, when you get more assists and you look to distribute more, you will end up invariably turning the ball over more too. Like it's just how like one cannot happen with the other. And yes, we've seen the turnovers increase for sure. We talked about it as it being frustrating. But this is it's more now that I think about it, it's more of a byproduct of a different style of game that he's saying when I let the ball go there, especially when I'm letting it go into smaller, tighter areas, like around the rim. Like I said, those slip passes, those lobs, the stuff that guys are flashing. Yeah, sometimes there's gonna be more defenders there and they're gonna be turned over. But if we can continue, if we need to keep defenses honest about those actions, it will only help scoring opportunities later. And it's probably, frankly, their best chance to win because the rest of the guys have to be able to score. Like in playoff atmospheres, they just have to be threats. And they are clearly turning into threats. And it's a lot of it's because he's been able to let go some of that part of the offense and will the other guys to be able to do it.
Yeah, if you look at it and say 22 assist attempts, not that every turnover was looking to facilitate, but 22 assist attempts, 6 of them were turnovers. 16 were successful though, right? So like you'll live with that ratio for what it gives you,
And can I
obviously.
say one thing about that number too?
Of
Like
course you
that
can.
number is probably skewed too because I'm not even counting like, and I would have to go back and track this. Synergy data, tracking data has this, and I don't have it in front of me. But how many times like a good pass was made that the other player just simply didn't capitalize on their own
Sure.
opportunity? Like that's not even those that isn't even factored in here. But those are numbers you can get your hands on to say, hey, that actually should have been an assist, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I just think we're just seeing so many more of these things. And it's just what is going to make the team better. When these guys trust that Kevin Durant, of all people, is willing to give them the ball in high leverage situations to score, I don't know what a bigger confidence boost in the world there could be than one of the single greatest scorers to ever live and play basketball is happy to give you the ball for you to go score. Like, what bigger confidence boost could you get? I'm not sure there is one.
No, and listen, tip of the cap here because we're talking. We always end up talking about Kevin Durant because it is so impressive.
Did Kyrie do
by
anything?
the way. Yeah, just if you're wondering, because as we've talked about previously too, it's boy, can he find his rhythm? Can he get his stroke back here before you hit this playing game and when you really need him most? I don't know. You tell me. Is 75% on 20 shot attempts a good performance from somebody? Because that's what Kyrie gave you: 15 to 24 of a 6 from beyond the arc with 35 points to boot and 7 rebounds to go along with his 5 assists. I mean, and this is just in context of who you're playing against. And, this is a get right game for Kyrie Irving. It's the right opponent to get right against. And I don't know if I really ever was overly concerned about his bad quote unquote shooting performances. It was more just about you like seeing a guy get in rhythm. Kyrie Irving being one who can essentially get into rhythm with one game, with 5 minute spurt, he's back in rhythm. So it's just nice to see it.
I think the reason we spent more time talking about Durant, and I think it's true, is because, and maybe we're just, spoiled at this point, but you tend to like start to talk about things that stood out to you as being maybe different than things we've seen before.
Sure.
And you're spoiled when you're like, oh yeah, Kyrie dropped 35. Okay, cool. Like, yeah, we've seen that. Like he's awesome. He's the absolute best. He's a complete and utter magician. And maybe that's bad for us for taking it for granted, because I definitely am at the point now with him where it's all just so perfect. Like when he's really rolling like this, that you can just be like, oh, it looks so easy that you, to the point of almost forgetting about it. It's like, oh, what really stood out? The assist for Durant. Well, yeah, I mean, part of that, and part of frankly, the main reason they won was because Kyrie was legit unstoppable once he really started putting his foot to the gas, right? Like once he really was like, okay, this is getting a little bit dumb. I'm just going to get every single thing I want near the basket with acrobatic finishes. Yeah. Like, and it kind of just feels like Kyrie. It's like,
that's my thing.
Yeah. It's like, hey, Ben, they're done that. I just know he can do that. Like, I just, so, I mean, yeah, there's no shade on him. It's really just a testament to how great it is that it almost sometimes doesn't even stand out.
And how these two things can work really well together for them going forward. I think it's what ties this together, right? If Kevin Durant is willing to go into this phase of his game, he's not going to go 5 of 17 in most playoff games. But if he can lean into this, it opens things up, which goes back to just to put a cap on it. Steve Nash saying the reason why we try to keep the ball out of Kyrie Irving's hands and not make him a pure point guard is because of how dangerous he is off the ball. So, putting these two elements together could be a real path forward for Brooklyn.
All right, when we come back, we are going to talk about the other big news of the day. Around one, Mr. Ben Simmons. Just when you think there's going to be no news, someone drops a pretty big piece of news about Simmons. We're going to talk about that in a second. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info right now for this playing game. Over at BetOnline, your Brooklyn Nets -8 against the lowly Cleveland Cavaliers. 8-point victory. Just lock it up at -8 for the Nets. They won't make you sweat it at all. Easy victory, no big deal. That's what BetOnline is telling you. BetOnline's got all you covered for all the latest sports developments, league reviews, news, and more. Can get you started for the basketball playoffs, get you rolling through Major League Baseball as well. It's your continued source for all your sports wagering information. They got live betting, they got playoffs, esports, and more. Head on over to betonline.net to learn more about all of the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And where we'll start to wrap things up here is, of course, again, this feels like the theme of the show in truly Brooklyn Nets fashion, something that we felt like we had a concrete perspective on. Put it to bed. Don't keep speculating. No reason to worry about the root. Ben Simmons, my friend, the update, and it's a juicy one, as we always know. Burning reporters trying to get there first. This one did not fall. It was not a Woj bomb, as a matter of fact. Beat to the punch by Shams Charania.
Yeah, well, Shams and Woj are like basically the 31st NBA franchise at this point. Like
They're dueling,
there's 30 real teams, and then there are these two guys that are like the 31st team that somehow have worked their way in. Now, look, he right before the game, it's all kind of feels like it's timed and planned. Woj is about to do a hit on ESPN, and then about 4 minutes before that starts, Shams drops the bomb that the Nets. That I'll just read it to you. There's optimism. This is from Shams Charania of the Athletic. There's optimism. Nets star Ben Simmons could make debut during first round of the NBA playoffs as long as his progression continues in strengthening his legs and back. Simmons has been ramping up his workload and is expected to continue doing so. Obviously, it does not come from the team. So, again, with all these things, who knows? When he plays, we can believe it. I will say, though, with this Shams thing, it does follow some well-timed social media pieces, one by the Nets themselves that just showed Ben Simmons working out. That was the day, or either earlier in the day or the day before. And that is the one that kind of puts your ears up a little bit because you're like, well, why would the team share? Like, they're not doing things willy-nilly. Like, the team would not share something like that unless they also knew that there might be a chance. So I feel like those two things dovetailing together looks very much like the timeline could be he returns, assuming they get to, they're not in the playoffs yet, folks. Like, assuming they get to the playoffs, that we could see Ben Simmons.
Yes, I want to come back to that last comment you made there before we close out the show. I guess so, right? I mean, we can only take this as a yes because Shams has reported going back a couple of weeks now. And we've always said he's usually on top of this stuff. When he says something, when it's reports, rumors, speculation, it usually does end up coming to fruition.
Well, can I just say why that is? He's repped by the same agency that Ben Simmons is,
right?
So
like to think he's not
both.
Getting,
yes, they're both represented by Clutch. So like when these reports come from him, he is like as dialed in with that side of the news piece of it as anybody, because again, they have the same representation. So like, but you're right. Like we've heard this before and we're now on April, we're recording this April 10th and there's still been only some, random videos of Ben Simmons putting up shots in practice. So I mean, how confident do you feel? I even with this stuff, is it like a little bit of glimmer of hope, or do you feel like if you had a bet on it right now that you see Ben Simmons with real minutes, what do you think?
Oh geez, yeah, we've done this dance before, and
this
I often come out on the wrong side of would I bet money on it. What I think will be interesting is assuming that the Nets take care of business in the playing game, and then they get into the playoff picture, how that first round is unfolding in conjunction with what you're hearing about Ben Simmons ramping up. I think that's going to maybe be the gauge that I go by, because if the Nets, we don't know who they're going to play yet. If they're up 2-0 in a series, if they're up 3-1 in a series, well, then you can, again, just stretch that timeline out a little bit further. Let him continue to ramp up into basketball condition. If you're down 2-1 in a series and you think that this guy can be someone that can give you even 10 to 15 minutes in a game and help you just defensively, let alone if he can do anything on the offensive end, then it's probably worth taking a look at and bringing him in. So, to speculate that he can come back, yes, I think he can come back, but it's going to be about the necessity piece of it, because if you're Brooklyn, there's no world where you can risk, and we said this before, you cannot risk his long-term value to this team, i.e. another injury that impacts his availability going into next season. You can't do that for a short-sighted goal of, well, could it get us over the hump in one of these series? Now, if you're talking conference finals and NBA finals, sure, then I think everything's on the table. And remember, that's a long time away. So my nugget out of this is that it looks like there's a strong chance he'll be able to play in this postseason. It may come down to how deep the Brooklyn Nets can go.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I totally agree with you. And I would say if you're going to take anything away from this, it's that all signs point that he's getting healthier, which is good. Like, right. So I don't think anyone would argue right now that the health is on the right trajectory. And I think that's all you can really think about. It's like, great. Things are progressing the way they should be. And I will just take most of this with a grain of salt because A, the Nets are absolutely brutal with this. And B, he just hasn't played yet. And so when those two things work together, you just simply can't trust anything. And so it's like, okay, let's take a little bit, let's be a little bit positive about it, but we can't just like pencil ourselves into Ben Simmons coming out of the gate round one, playing 33 minutes of like 30 to 35 minutes of high leverage basketball. I think that's probably an unrealistic thing, but does it seem like he's getting healthier? All signs point that he is. He's warming up. He was out there in warmups. He was doing a lot more shooting in warmups, things that he hasn't really done before the game. So I think there are really a lot of positive signs to go along with this report. And I feel like for my own sanity, and it sounds like you're saying the same thing, need to just temper my expectations just a little bit here, because until he's out there on the court, you just can't. The team has not given you anything to trust. Like, they just are terrible with this. So that's just it.
When you wish upon a star, sometimes it just doesn't come true, and then you're just left looking like an idiot staring at the sky. So hopefully it works out, but we'll see as it progresses here. And then just as we do close out, I want to reiterate, because you said it before we came on, keep saying it. The Nets are not in the playoffs yet. They are in the play-in game to get into the playoffs. And we both have been very much, what is the objective in front of us? Beat Houston, beat the Knicks, beat the Cavs, beat the Pacers. Okay, you did those things. Now go beat the Cavs again, and then you're in the playoffs. And before that happens, I'm also, you talk about not going to assume that we're going to get Ben Simmons back. I'm not assuming we're in the playoffs until you beat the Cavs on Tuesday night. That's when you're officially in the NBA playoffs.
Yeah, right. And I've seen it happen from too many, like, frankly, reporters that are saying things like, hey, they're the 7th seed, this is who they're going to play. Like, that is not done yet. And these teams, talking about, the Celtics are playing as we speak right now. And then I think looks like they're going to end up being the 2 seed here in the East. Again, the Nets still need to win another game. The Celtics are the 2 seed. The Nets are currently the 7th seed who need to win another game to stay the 7th seed. So just really pump the brakes. And that also and look, are they big, like, on Bet Online? Did we just say they're -8 favorites? Yes. Like, they are projected to win the game. So I get it. And unlike the Celtics, they still need to play another game.
Yep.
So just
maybe 3-game season. That's what this is for Brooklyn.
Correct. And so, like, they still, and it wasn't like the Cavs didn't give them a fight last game, right? Like, this is a team, that's going to be a playoff battle, right? Like, this is going to be a real game. Yep. And so this is a PSA from Adam and I. Like, the Nets are currently the 7th seed with another game to play. That is how you need to phrase it. They are not playing the Celtics right now. Please do not say these things. It's just bad. It's just misrepresenting what the actual situation.
You talked about it earlier. What Kevin Durant could have accomplished if you hadn't opened your mouth and thrown it out into the universe. Friends, come on. Let's wait until we get that 1-1.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's all. We've just seen it from too many people. That's mostly what it is. It's just that I wouldn't even have mentioned it, except that just, people talking about, they're tanking to get away from the Nets, or they're doing this or doing that. I was like, they might be doing those things. They don't know who they're going to play. It could be any one of it could still be any one of these 4 teams. Like, Let's just get through the playing game. And then we'll do it. Okay. Going into the playing game, we're going to jump on with the Locked On Cavs guys and give a pretty full breakdown of what to expect from that one. So that should be really fun. That'll be coming out tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure that you are liking and subscribing over on YouTube. Really appreciate all the comments, all the questions, everything that goes on there. Disagree, agree. It's all good. We love it all. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube channel.
As we surge ahead, only past and present Nets players for the quotes, my friends. Nobody is going to stop you from being you but yourself. Kyrie Irving.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.